All right. I would like to welcome y'all to the City of Forest Park and to our senior center. My name is Ray Quinn. I am the environmental manager for the environmental program for the city. This is our second year at doing these environmental lecture series. Last year we had 4 presentations. If you haven't gotten a handout on what they were, they're up on the table. You can go click on the link and you can watch them if you missed it. This year we're going to have 3. And again, there's a handout over there that lists the 3 and the dates. Tonight we're going to have good bugs and not so good bugs, as you see up on the screen. August the 2nd, we're going to have Ohio native plants, medicinally speaking. And then in October, towards the end, nature did it first. And that's the one I really want to see, because nature has been around a lot longer than we have. And I'm sure they did it first before we thought we were the ones. So anyway, I want to thank Waycross Community Media for taping this. They've done all our presentations, so I really want to thank them for doing that. And it'll be on our webpage, so if your friends are interested in bugs, the good and the bad, tell them to go to our website, and we'll have it on our website probably within a week or 2, so they can see it. Before we get going, there are a few house chores that we need to go over. The bathrooms are down the hall to the right. If you're not on my email list, please put your name on the email list and you'll be a part of our kind of email family. And the way that we're going to proceed is Carol's going to give the presentation, then we'll have a question and answer session, and then we'll do our raffle. And it looks like that everybody might win something. Okay, so without any further ado, let me introduce Carol. Now, I've known Carol and her husband for a long time, but I am always amazed at what they do. I even went over to their house about, a month ago? 2 months ago? Time kind of flies.
I know, it's been a while since we've been here.
And what they have in their backyard is amazing. You talk about natural and native. It is. But she has been working as a naturalist for a long, long time. And so I'm going to read you this. And this is just a pinprick of all the things that she does. She's a naturalist, speaker, and writer, and is taught in the University of Cincinnati and Hamilton County Park District. She leads classes on urban wildlife issues, native plants, weed identification, and the historical use of plants. Carol is a recipient of a citation for horticulture education from the Garden Club of Ohio. She continues to offer lectures and workshops in her retirement, which seems to be working harder in your retirement.
I know.
Than when you were a naturalist.
How did I have time to do the other stuff when I was working?
I don't know. And teaching informally for many groups from master gardeners to wildlife rehabilitators. She is also a host of a weekly radio program called The Outdoor Life on WMKV radio here in Cincinnati, and I was a guest of it this week and had a great time. Really great time.
Brett was an excellent guest.
I had a great time. And her show features unique topics and interviews tying together nature, science, art, and culture. Now that's just a little bit of what she does. Today and tonight you're going to hear a lot more of what she knows. She also is a consultant and has developed her own consulting firm.
The Crow Knows.
The Crow Knows. And she's just everywhere. So please, I'd like to introduce Carol and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you. I see some returning faces. That always makes me feel good. A good way to spend a very hot evening. Now, we could be outside and it would be really buggy, but we wouldn't be happy talking about them, would we? Well, I thought we'd talk about bugs, the good bugs and not so good bugs. And some of the most frequent questions I get are about bugs, and I'm using the quotes there because often what people are asking about, they're just calling everything bugs. So bugs might be a spider, might be a daddy longlegs, might be a pill bug, a centipede, a millipede, maybe even slugs and snails, depending on who you talk to. But I think what they're trying to say is something's bugging them, it's bothering them, so they want to find out more about it. And by offering classes like this, I'm hoping to maybe temper if you have a little bit of misgivings, a little fear. I'm not going to, walk around with a big old spider on my hand. I don't do that. But I just want to give you some information to make some informed choices about that. Real quick, I have a survey. I'd like to know, I want you to holler out one moth or one butterfly that you know. Polyphemus. Oh, excellent answer. She gets extra points. Any butterfly or moth that you might know? Monarch. Monarch. Yep, that's the top of the list. Any other ones?
Atlas.
The Atlas moth. Now, they're not in this country, but they got like a 16-inch wingspan. You might have seen them at the Krohn Conservatory. The gypsy moth, now being called the spongy moth, yes, can cause a problem. Yep, not native, but it's still here, been here a long time.
Hummingbird moth.
The hummingbird moth, and we'll get to see a picture of that one, because people think that it's a baby hummingbird. All right. So what makes a good bug good? Is it because it has beautiful colors, lovely wings? Is it a pollinator? Maybe it's a good bug because it eats bad bugs. Like a praying mantis, it eats other bugs. So does that make it a good bug? I can't answer that. You have to answer that. Is it good because of the things it doesn't do? It doesn't eat your food. It doesn't sting or bite humans. It doesn't leave a mess in your house or garden. It doesn't smell bad. The picture that's up there is one that most people say is a good bug. This is our native ladybug, the convergent ladybug, and she does have a smell. Have you ever had one trapped in the house, or you went to move it thinking you're doing a little favor and it puts off kind of a very bitter scent? That's the ladybug's way of saying, don't eat me, I taste bad. In addition to wearing the warning colors of red and black, warning colors out in nature are red and black, yellow and black. That's usually to say stop. And even the skunk wears black and white. We've talked about that in programs past, saying stop, don't bother me, you'll be sorry. So what makes a bad bug bad? Again, you have to answer that question for yourself. Is it because it's ugly? I think this marmorated stink bug is pretty ugly. They were brought in, and we'll talk about that. Do they have scary wings? Sometimes you're not as frightened of something until those wings come out, and then it really catches you off guard. Is it have a weird, gooey body? There's some of those kinds of icky things in the larval form that really may be kind of gross and disgusting. However, that being said, there are many larvae of butterflies that look like bird droppings. So that's ooey and yucky, but it turns into a beautiful butterfly. If you look like bird poop, you're less likely to get it, I guess. Is it bad because it bites or stings humans? Or it eats your plants, or your house, or your food? It leaves a mess in your house or garden, or it smells bad. The smell that the marmorated stink bug puts out is kind of a strange, sour, to me it smells a little bit like cilantro, and it's really ruined cilantro for me. Some people can't stand the smell of cilantro, and I'm okay with it until the marmorated stink bug showed up. Those particular bugs were brought over. They weren't brought here on purpose, but they ended up coming over in materials that were brought in from other countries. And there's nothing here that keeps it in check. There's no predator specifically of that guy. And so they have gone like crazy. And I don't know about you. I'm in the C section of Forest Park. But there are some fall days, even with the windows closed, I can easily find a few dozen of these stink bugs coming in through the cracks, or the bafflings on the doors and windows. The worst thing is to discover it when you're in your bed and you're looking up. I'm not sleeping until I get him out of there. Well, let's look at stink bugs and other things within that family. So stink bugs, shield bugs, leaf-footed bugs, aphids, and cicadas, there's your hint, cicadas, only have that long, strong, straw-like, it's called a proboscis, and they are sucking the fluids out of plants. That can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing. If you're a gardener and you have aphids, you're really mad about that. And so maybe you need something else to come and eat the aphids, and we'll talk about it. For me, I'm really interested in some of these bugs, and the more you look at them, the more you find some way to remember. So the feeling about this guy who looks so big and threatening, and they're about an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter long, is he looks like he's wearing chaps. You know, like the cowboy that's been on the horse too long and he's got bow legs. He walks that way, but he looks so threatening, but he cannot bite. He cannot sting. He just has plant juices on his mind. That's what he does. We often have them coming into our houses. You won't see them very much right now, but as we move into the dry period in August and September, and then the cooling days in October, you might find a few very close to the house or ending up in the house. Cicada is on that same list. Cicada is not a locust. I know we all grew up probably calling, the locusts are coming. No, it's cicadas were coming. We had our chance a few years ago. So 2021, we had the last big brood of cicada. Cicadas are in that same family as leafhoppers and stink bugs and leaf-footed bugs. They would just drink plant juices. But here's the really interesting thing. They have that long proboscis, and I'm holding him up, and you can kind of imagine that strip down the middle of his body is where that straw lies. The adults do not eat. They only live a few weeks. They're looking to party. They're looking for their girlfriend or their boyfriend in that short period of time that they're above the ground. They have their little party. The females go to lay eggs. The eggs drop off into the soil, and depending on whether it's an annual cicada, where you'll have eggs that will hatch the next summer, or the periodic, where those nymphs will be below the surface for 13 to 17 years. That's a long time when you think about an insect in development. The other thing about these cicadas is that you're going to find those shells, and you start to find some anytime now, especially in July and August. You're going to find the big big annual cicada. They're about as long as my thumb. They have green-edged wings and black eyes. You might find their shells hanging on the outside of your house, not like we did back in 2021, where there were piles of the empty shells. It's not going to be like that. But every year we do have a cicada that's hatching that's a completely different type. But they do not bite, they do not sting, and they will not lay eggs on you. So all the fear that comes about when we have periodic cicada emergence and people are running and screaming, these bugs are really kind of docile. They fly, they're kind of goofy, but they're not biting and they're not stinging. Now this guy, here's Alien versus Predator. I mean, you don't need any science fiction when you look at bugs. It's all right there. And I think that's where the science fiction writers got that. So if you think about, you saw that leaf-footed bug. It's a similar shaped body, but the leaf-footed bugs are plant suckers. These guys eat meat. And man, is he ready to do battle. If you look at the shape of this guy, he's got those spines on the back of his neck between what we'd think of as shoulder blades. But what you are really seeing is here's this big hook. I don't know if I have a clicker. There we go. See that? It looks like a dagger. Here's a piece of it right there. Yep, there it is. So what he does is he waits, and when another bug comes by, and here he's doing you a favor. Look, he's eating a Japanese beetle. Yay! He waits. He grabs them with these predator-like arms. He puts that dagger in, which immobilizes that insect. Then he puts the proboscis, has a chemical that goes in, and it liquefies the inside, and he slurps it up like a smoothie. And then he casts the shell away. I mean, if that's not something out of science fiction, I don't know what it is. They can get quite big as well. They might be upwards of almost 2 inches. They're rather slow moving. You're not as likely to see them. Occasionally you find one in the garden or around the bed of a house, especially if you live in an older home where you have a rocky outcropping or a rock wall, you may see them. I would say don't kill them, but also don't pick them up, because they will use that dagger as a means of trying to get you to let them go. And I don't want you to experience that. So yes, just let him eat the Japanese beetles. Yay. Here's a few beetles you might know. Right now, I'm starting to see what we used to call June beetles, May beetles, depending on when you see them, I guess. They hang out around your porch light. Some nights there's a couple dozen. And when you look at the volume of those beetles hanging there, every toad, every bat that might be around, all the other little creatures that as they fall down to the ground, the chipmunks, the squirrels, all of those kinds of things will be eating those beetles. Beetles have 2 sets of wings. And most people don't realize that. They fly. They're not very good flyers, but they do fly. So they have 2 sets of wings. You've got this hard outer shell. That's their protectant. And then there's that very filmy or glassy looking flight wing that allows them to fly. And then they close those back up again. And the ladybug had that as well. So all of the beetles, and in Ohio we have about 200 species of beetles. Do you know them all? Okay. When we look at beetles, we have this situation. So here's our ladybug. Do you know that's your state insect? Kind of like you have a state flower and a state flag. This is your state insect for Ohio. So the convergent ladybug lays her eggs on a plant. They hatch. They look like little alligators. See them here? And they feast on aphids, both as larvae and when they're adult beetles. So go ladybugs. Now, it used to be you could send away for ladybugs to put in your garden to eat aphids. And my friend, you might remember Denny McEwen, he used to say, do those come with leashes so they don't fly away? Because how are you going to keep the ladybugs in your yard? But there you can see that portion of the wing. That's the non-native ladybug. There's the filmy wing. Those ladybugs were brought to the United States and brought into the southern states to control the aphids and some of the other little bugs that we get on, say, the pecans in the southern states. At the time when they were brought over, it was believed that those ladybugs would not survive in the northern states, in the northern climes. Well, I think it was less than 10 years from when they were brought over and let go on purpose before we had them in Ohio, and then they were in Minnesota within a few years. I'm not seeing as many of those. It used to be on a fall day you might see a few hundred on the outside of your house. I don't see them quite as often. They're not overly competitive, so it's not like you have some of these other invasive species that are actually competing with your native beetles or other insects. We're not seeing that so much with that non-native, that multicolored Asian ladybug. They can have all the aphids they want. Other great beetles, and all of these beetles, except for the red and black one, all of these can be found right here in Forest Park. The giant click beetle is probably about half as long as my finger and at least that wide. They are grayish, gray-green. They have those 2 giant eye spots on the back. And then the smaller one you may find underneath the porch light. The click beetle on that side with the eyes needs to be near a wooded area. So if you're in the area of Forest Park that you back up to woods or you're near a riparian, a creek area, you're more likely to see the bigger guys. What's really unique is they protect themselves by, they'll be walking along, and if you were to touch them, they flatten out, and then they just pop. They spring right up. So it's that surprise mechanism. And if it's a bird or a cat, it's really funny to watch a cat when they've touched it and it flattens down and then it pops up like a piece of popcorn. So we have those, and then weevils, of course, the guy with the big old schnoz. You're going to find them. Some of them are quite tiny. That one is a blown up picture of the weevil that gets inside acorns. So this fall, when you're walking around and you pick up an acorn and you see a tiny hole in there, you know that the weevil has gotten inside. There's no nut meat left because that's what the babies are eating. That big stag beetle, again, if you're in some of these forested areas or riparian near a creek in Forest Park, on a late summer evening, you might go out and have one of these hit the screen door or around the porch light, and boy, are they impressive. They're easily 2 inches long. Now that's a male with the big pinchers, and yes, they will pinch if you happen to pick him up, but it's really mostly show. He's doing that to show off for the ladies. And occasionally you will find 2 of them battling back and forth to gain the attention, where she's probably gone off to, get a little drink of nectar or something. The one at the bottom, this beetle, this is the American burying beetle. It used to be here in Forest Park in all of Hamilton County. It's now on the endangered species list. It has been reintroduced at the Fernald Preserve. And what they've done there, what's so unique about this beetle is that a male and female pair together and stay together to raise the young. They will come across a carcass like a rabbit, a dead possum, and the two of them will move the soil from underneath until that animal falls in. They cover it over, they go inside the body, and she lays eggs, and then they tend to those eggs and protect them and the larva when the babies hatch. That's about the only beetle that does that. They really are magnificent. They're really quite big, beautiful. Lightning bugs, fireflies, those are beetles. Did you know that? I've encountered some people that don't realize that lightning bugs are beetles. We have about 24 species native to Ohio. It's getting harder and harder to find them because they really need some undisturbed, wooded, damp areas. With these different types, they hatch out at different times. I know within our community that we have around the middle of May to Memorial Day, I start seeing the ones that are floating just above the grass line after it gets dark. Right now, we have the ones they call Christmas lights, where they're up higher in the tree. You have to stay up a little later to see them, but it is magnificent to watch. So they are doing this by chemicals in their body. This is bioluminescent. There's no little chain with a battery and a light. They're making that light. Now they're signaling to let the other fireflies know where they are. However, that backfires sometimes because there are a few varieties. Most of them are just plant eaters. But some of them, the female, femme fatale, she will watch a different species of firefly male, and she'll mimic his light, and she waits. So if he blinks twice and stops, she blinks twice. Does it again, and maybe he comes a little closer, and a little closer, and a little closer, and then he's dinner. She eats him. She eats him, and that she also takes in that bioluminescent chemical into her body that she uses as a defense mechanism. I'm sure you all caught fireflies when you were a kid, and maybe you went to that point where you would take them apart, and they have a very strong, bitter odor, and that is a defense mechanism so that other animals don't eat them. Although occasionally you might have a toad or a frog swallow them, and it's still blinking. You'll see it in their throat. The firefly larva, and they could be larvae for almost a year's time in moist soil. They really want to be in those moist woodlands, riparian areas, and then they have to have some tall, unmowed grass and untreated, so not chemicals. No chemicals. If you use chemicals, you're not going to have a lot of these really good bugs. But they will remain in the soil, and they eat things like worms, slugs, and snails. It has been a banner year for slugs at our house, so they can have all the slugs they can eat. I'd be happy to supply all the firefly larvae with slugs if I could. Eat more would be my point. Eat more. Ohio also has a group of synchronous fireflies. It used to be that we thought it was just down in the Smokies or down in Shenandoah, and what that means is that instead of a blink here and a blink there, it's 10,000 fireflies blink at the same time. Blink and turn off. Blink and turn off. I mean, that's nature's fireworks. Well, in the eastern edge of Ohio, get into Adams County and up towards what they call edge of Appalachia, which is Highland County, they now have found pockets of synchronous fireflies. And when you want to go see those, you basically have to get into a lottery, especially if you go to the Smokies. People will wait years to put their name on a list to see if they get in because they can't have 20,000 people get into a spot to see that.
Yeah, I was on the Sierra Club trip in North Carolina, near Asheville, just south, and we were there during that synchronous fireflies, and it was just amazing.
You got to see that. Yeah, I think that's one of those things you just don't expect to happen maybe in your lifetime that you'd have a chance to see it. I want to let you know that not all green shiny bugs are bad bugs. We do have this guy. This is a tiger beetle, and they're extremely fast. They're predators. They have very sharp mandibles. And when you see, whether it's this one, they have a sandy-colored one, there's a striped one. I think there's about 12 varieties of tiger beetle. That is a barometer that that habitat that you're seeing the tiger beetle is in good shape, because they're very susceptible to extreme drought, dry conditions. They need loose, sandy soil and moist conditions. They might even be in damp woodlands. So if you're walking in the woodlands around here, even around Winton Woods, on some of those trail areas, it's damp enough that they will come and hunt in the pathways. Makes it easy for them. We put a pathway through, and here they come, and they sun themselves, and they wait for other insects. So that's a good guy. This guy, not so much. This is a tree killer. This is the emerald ash borer. I'm sure you've heard about that. They do have a beautiful color. However, they can get into the living layers of the tree and actually cause it to die. And it takes a while. We're looking at 3 to 5 years before a tree is noticeable, and after that, it's too late. Again, that was an insect that was brought over not on purpose. That was brought over in a load of lumber that came across the ocean from Asia. So most of these things were not brought over on purpose, but when they got here, there was no other predator to keep them in check. And there's a little description. So if you're seeing trees that have that very distinctive D-shaped hole, that is the emerald ash borer. Even if you walk around and look at trees that have died from that, that distinctive hole shape tells you that it's this particular borer. We do have native tree borers, but they don't cause damage like this guy does. My advice to you when talking about bugs eating your stuff, in the words of Queen Elizabeth, keep calm and carry on. It's a joke because this is a carrion beetle. He eats dead things. I know, I couldn't help myself. Even Wright rolled his eyes when I told him that one. I actually had that carrion beetle come into, there had been a dead possum or squirrel at the back of our property, and we went to see what was going on back there, and when we moved it, one of these flew out, and he's about the size of a dime, but pretty interesting to see that. He was just doing his job. He's cleaning up, part of the cleanup crew. Moths and butterflies are so much more than flying flowers, and I hope that if you've been to the Crone, you've gotten some of that information, but it's so amazing what you have in your own backyard if you just take the chance to see that. So I'm looking at, these are micrographs. Whoops. There we go. Go back one more. Those are, looking under the electron microscope, those are the scales that are on the wings of a butterfly. They're very distinctive depending on the type of butterfly. And then this is a blown up, again, electron microscope view of the eyes. That's why you can't sneak up on a butterfly. Look at the size of those eyes. And then that coiled bit is, we call it the proboscis, you might call it a tongue. And that's a little skipper that's over here. And just imagine that he has that same equipment, but he's about the size of my baby finger. They put that way down in the flower and probe for nectar. Now, some flowers develop a very deep throat so that the butterfly or whatever else the pollinator is has to go really put its head way down in there. And when that happens, it might get rewarded with the nectar, but it's all covered with pollen. And then it goes to the next flower, and that pollen gets off on the flower, and then we've got a little fertilization going on. Pretty tricky. Here's two butterflies, a butterfly and a moth that are similar in size. We do have both of them here in Forest Park. But often when a viceroy is flying, the first thing that comes to mind is a monarch, right? So the viceroy, over many, many eons of years, has changed to look very similar to the monarch. The monarch feeds on milkweed. The viceroy does not. The monarch takes in the toxins from the milkweed, which means if something eats that monarch butterfly or caterpillar, It will taste bad and make them sick. The viceroy does not. But birds and lizards and frogs learn that that monarch had a really bad taste, so they avoid this guy as well. If you notice the difference here between moth and butterfly, generally moths have a little bit more feathered antenna. Males often have a big feather. It almost looks like a fern growing out of their head. The moths have a very fat, fluffy body, females especially when they're full of eggs, where the butterfly has a pretty compact, kind of a pencil-shaped body instead. Butterflies create a chrysalis. Moths create cocoons. That's where their whole body changes. They go into this kind of a silken sleeping bag, if you will, and the body recreates itself from that wormy-like creature, the caterpillar, into a pupa, a resting phase, and then develops into an adult, and then it finds its way back out of that chrysalis or cocoon. Most butterflies pupate in a few weeks, some a few months. Some moths can take more than a year to mature. Some moths pupate in the ground. There's a couple of moths that form, when their pupa forms, they call it a little brown jug. It's about the shape of my finger, about that size. And if you were digging, especially underneath a tree, you might find one and think, well, what's this? And if you picked it up, you might notice that it's moving. I'd say just put it back and let him finish out what he's going to do. But that's the moth that will emerge the next year in the pupa, in the ground, in the pupa case. They're both great pollinators. Butterflies are usually daytime flyers. Moths are mostly nighttime flyers. There are a few that are active during the daylight. Just a real quick sprinkling of things that you could expect to see that most of you already know about. So there's the monarch butterfly and the caterpillar. Look at the coloration on that caterpillar. Yellow, black, white. It's telling you, don't eat me, I taste bad. They only eat milkweed. They will not, the larva will not eat anything else. Down below is the cute little hackberry emperor. There's that, kind of looks like another green worm. However, the hackberry is very friendly. He's the one, if you're out taking a walk, maybe you're even in a field near the forest edge, it may come and land on you, land on your hand. They're drawn to the temperature and the CO2 we're putting out, but they also like your sweat. They think you taste good. So they may rest on your hand and you'll see that little proboscis, the tongue, come out, and they'll be testing the areas to see if they can get a little bit of that. Now, while the hackberry emperor adult licks nectar, it also likes rotting fruit, dead animals, and animal droppings. So just think about that. Tell him to wipe his feet before he lands on you. Here's the black swallowtail. If you grow, that's a golden Alexander in our yard, but in your garden it might be eating things like parsley, dill, and fennel. Occasionally I have somebody call me or send me a picture going, there's this worm eating all my food, what do I do? Plant more parsley, it's okay. I would much rather have the swallowtail eat that. I can grow more parsley, so just grow some more. Here's another unique form of a way to not get eaten. If you have big eye spots on your larva form, on your caterpillar. So a bird flies in, he sees those two big eyes looking back at him, may perceive that to be a small snake, and goes on his way. And will leave that butterfly alone.
Weren't those like, I know when I had that decorative cabbage, it seemed like those things were attracted to her, or they were more or less embedded in it.
In the cabbage, you mean? There's a cabbage white butterfly. There is one that's non-native. That's the one we fight most if you're growing anything in the cabbage family. You'll get those guys, and boy, can they really decimate your crop. But we do have some that are not quite as, there's some native ones. I have one of those in a piece up here. He was on broccoli leaves a couple days ago. And if I find him, I just pick him off because I don't want to spray my veggies. But it is maddening because your crop looks really good and then all of a sudden the cabbage worms have moved in. So yes, you're right. It does look like that green cabbage worm, but if you had a chance, you'll notice this one has what looks like two little antlers to the front and to the back, where that little green cabbage worm is smooth the whole way. Moths are beautiful in their own right, and when people ask about Moths and butterflies, just to put this into perspective, in Ohio, I think there's about 130 species of butterflies in the state of Ohio. There are more than 3,000 moth species. That's a lot. You could spend your whole life trying to identify them. We're not going to do that tonight. But I just want to bring that to your attention. See this really interesting, oops, all right, go back. That tulip right there, this white fuzzy guy. I mean, he looks like he's wearing a white fluffy coat. That's on the brick of my front house, the front of my house. So I have the porch light, here's the door, and over here another brick section. That's where he was resting. Cecropia moths, I've had those in my backyard. And the caterpillars can get huge. They're bigger around and longer than my finger. They look quite menacing. And then they build a really unique silk cocoon that's about the color of, say, a fawn or champagne, a real pale color like that. Shiny, beautiful, and they can be in that cocoon for almost a year. Many years ago, I collected what I thought was a non-viable cocoon. It was hanging on an outside chair. I collected it and I put it in a critter getter like this to put into my teaching collection. One day in my office in March, I hear flutter, 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 flutter. It hatched. And I felt really bad because there was nothing, it wasn't going to live outside. I let it go, but probably a screech owl ate it. But look at the size of that Cecropia. Here's the hummingbird moth, and he looks like a baby hummingbird. He's about this big. He has kind of a clear wing, but he's that green color like our ruby-throated hummingbird, or he can be kind of, again, that beige or champagne color. And there's the hummingbird moth's larva stage. The caterpillar has that spine at the top. Now we know that there are some other hornworms, and if you are a veggie gardener, you look for tomato hornworms or tobacco hornworms. But this one is a good guy. So if you will take a minute the next time you find a hornworm and decide what he really is, it's pretty easy to look at the pictures of that particular insect, this hummingbird moth, and see that the larva looks a lot different than a tomato hornworm. Which as a kid, I was paid, a penny a piece to pick off the tomato hornworm and put it in the soapy water. Do you see the face on this guy? Look at that. You see the face? How in the world did nature know that if somehow on the back of a moth, if it puts a spooky face, maybe it'll scare a bird so it doesn't get eaten? There's a number of moths that have big faces or insect-looking eyes, or I was just reading about one today that looks like two brightly colored flies feeding on bird poop, the back of this moth's wings, and they put up a picture of the fly that it's the picture of the fly that is mimicking on the moth. Now that moth can't decide, I want to look like a fly with red eyes. How did that ever happen? If you're interested in making sure, besides having a pollinator garden, you offer other things for butterflies and moths, you can do something as simple as a puddling station. This is a small tray, that little tray that's gone underneath your pot, especially the type that's made out of red clay. And you put a little sand, a few rocks, and a little bit of pea gravel or rounded gravel. There's not water standing. It's less likely to be infested with mosquitoes. It's just moist. It's just damp. And they will come in and take that moisture and take the minerals from the sand as well. What those tiger swallowtails are on happens to be dog poop. But they will come in if you have a little bit of rotting fruit. I'm not saying to put out a bunch because you don't want to have other varmints come in. But you could offer little bits of things like that and just see which butterflies come into it. We do have some caterpillars and moths that maybe make the bad list. Both of these moths are native to Ohio, but most people will really, you can hear them grinding their teeth and being mad about these two. You have the eastern tent caterpillar. That's what the egg sac looks like, and it overwinters. It's in mass on the tree. It looks like a little piece of leather, and it's on the tree and stays through the winter, and then the tiny caterpillars hatch out in the spring, and then you'll see the big webby nest if you will. It's not exactly a nest. It's just a big condo full of teenagers. And they spin that web as a means of protection, and they go out onto the tree to feed and come back. In most cases, they are not going to defoliate the tree. If you have a small tree, if you have a sapling that has less than a 3-inch diameter, less than, say, 6 feet tall, it could be a problem. But in mature trees, it's not going to defoliate the tree. The other thing about these is that for some people, they think, oh, I got to spray it, I got to get it. In the old days, they'd go out and take the torch and light it on fire. That eastern tent caterpillar is the main food for the yellow-billed cuckoo. I'm not making that up. That's his real name. He is a cuckoo. We have him right here in Forest Park. But that's his main food. So I try and err on the fact that I'd rather have some cuckoos, and maybe you think I'm cuckoo because I'll side with the cuckoo, and let a few of the tent caterpillars stay. They've not defoliated a tree that I have. And of course, here's what the wigglers look like, and they're really quite foul in the way that they taste. So other things that might eat them, like chipmunks and so on, do not. They're also hairy, but for whatever reason, that yellow-billed cuckoo doesn't seem to mind any of that. And how about the bagworm? Everybody likes to complain about the bagworm. Here's the moth, and that's the male. You see he's got wings. The female never leaves the bag. The little tiny caterpillars come out. They start feeding. They start putting this stuff on their back. If they're females, they move around on the tree. She comes out from the edge of her sleeping bag to eat, carries it with her, and then retreats. She has basically been mated as soon as she gets to adulthood, and when she is still in the bag, she's now got the babies that are hatching out, and they're eating her before they go on to eat your evergreen. They say it's a dog-eat-dog world, but I'd say it's a bagworm-eats-bagworm world. Crickets and katydids, we're heading into the time of the year with crickets and katydids and grasshoppers being really quite the songster. If you're out in the early morning hours, or if you go out after dark, you're going to start hearing some of these insect sounds, which I find them very pleasant compared to other noises you might hear outside. Do you have these crazy camel crickets? They are all over. Like I said, I'm back kind of on the edge towards the dam, the retention basin. And they have these ridiculously long legs and very long antennae. They turn up in my laundry room. They turn up in the garage. Of course, the cats love to play with them. I find them outside a little bit. But they're pretty crazy looking, and they can really jump. But they're good food for birds as well. And of course, you might have things like crickets and grasshoppers in the same vicinity. Grasshoppers and crickets can also get into your veggie garden and eat and eat and eat. So that's another issue. So grasshoppers make a sound by rubbing a raised section of the upper segment of the last legs across the wing. It's more of a raspy kind of a sound compared to katydids and crickets, which tend to be a little more melodic. Katydids, they say katydid did, katydid didn't. It's that ch-ch-ch-ch-ch-ch-ch. And you should start hearing that outside now, any time now. With this kind of heat, they're going to be singing at night especially. Crickets, locusts, grasshoppers, cicada all have a similar life cycle. As adults, they have wings and can fly. They have chewing mouth parts, so they're eating the plants. Cicada, which often get thrown into that group, do not belong. One of these things is not like the other. Cicada, he doesn't belong, or she doesn't belong in that group. Cicada have sucking mouth parts, and as an adult, they do not feed. They're only alive for a few weeks. Now, under the ground, in this nymphal stage, this kind of weird-looking armored thing, they're crawling around underneath. They're actually aerating the soil. They're doing you a favor. They're aerating the soil. But as they're under there, they're feeding on grass roots, tree roots, plant roots. They're not necessarily damaging it. That's not a bad thing. And they're going to be eaten by moles and shrews and about everything else that might eat a bug. Thankfully, the annual cicadas don't come out in the huge groups like we have with the periodic. As the summer moves on, I see more and more praying mantis around. Some that are not much bigger than a grain of rice, all the way to a full adult. She might be as much as 6 inches long. We have 2 different types of praying mantis in the state of Ohio. One is the Carolina mantid, and they are native here. The other one is the Chinese mantid, and I think I have that on the next slide. But I want you to look, so here, look at the picture of this little guy right here. This is the egg case, and it lays flat on a twig, so parallel to that twig. You might find it on rose, you might find it on spirea, just about any kind of shrub. They could also be on the side of your house. I have a brick house, and I tend to find them where the mortar comes together. And they hatch out the following year. Now, if you are a smarty pants and decide you're going to scrape that off and put it in your bug catcher and bring it in, I guarantee you it's going to hatch inside, and you're not going to be happy when they have 1,000 baby praying mantises walking around in your living room. Ask me how I know that's happened. You can see she is really armed for battle. She's got these kind of raptor-like front legs, big eyes. If you walk past them, they turn their head and look at you. They have that very strong mandible mouth parts, so they're chewing the insect that they're eating while it's alive, more science fiction. And then here's a Carolina mantid, a Chinese mantid. One of the ways to know which is which is if you look at the way the wings come. On the Chinese mantid, the wings come almost the whole length of the body. On the last slide, the wing stops about 2/3 down. That's the easiest way to know them. The other thing is they have 2 different kinds of egg cases. So here's this egg case. Years ago, I had a neighbor call me, and she was worried that she had a shrub that was full of fungus. She called me over, and I looked at them, and she must have had 10 egg cases on one shrub. And I said, oh, not to worry. It's not fungus. It's just praying mantis. It's a really good place to live. It's a great neighborhood. Lots of praying mantis. And again, when they hatch, whoops, if you look at that number, they are piling out in the hundreds. They're tinier than a grain of rice. They are fully formed. They look just like an adult. And if they don't find something smaller than them to eat, they will eat each other. So they just keep eating and shedding and eating and shedding until they get big enough. And yes, the females will take the male. They will have a little time together, share some genetic information, and then she may make a meal of him when she's finished. Ohio has about 500 native species of bees, but the one bee everybody seems to know about is the honeybee. I have some friends that are beekeepers, and I said, you know, the honeybee is kind of like the ambassador. If you can get people, they're excited about honeybees, pollinate food, they make honey, you know, you raise them almost like you would have livestock. If I can get you to understand honeybees, then maybe you'll be interested in some of our native bees as well, because they do the job that honeybees cannot. With that volume of different kinds of honeybees, I'm sure you've seen a lot of these little tiny guys. We call them sweat bees. They're little, tiny, usually bright green. They do sting if you happen to get one in between your sock or, you know, in your flip-flop. That's going to happen. They are a bee. Here's the good thing. All of those bees that are out there, whether it's a honeybee, a ground bee, a mason bee, none of the males have stingers. Not a bee, not a wasp, not a hornet. Sorry, guys. You've got all the bark, but no bite. So, you know, as we move into the time where we have those big carpenter bees and they come right here, that's the male. He's trying to tell you how bad he is, but he's got no stinger. He's just protecting the territory. I think that was the card. You've got that on the table over there, don't you? The card, the flat card, yeah, the bigger one. Here they are. So you can each have a copy of the card. So honeybees are not native to the United States. They were brought over in the 1700s. And they have escaped into the wild. So you might have honeybees that are naturalized where they're nesting in a hollowed tree, a blown down wild cherry, or whatever the case might be, but those were non-native bees that were brought over from Europe. Think about this, just the variety of bumblebees. If you like to eat any of those things, apples, cucumbers, any of the squash, raspberries, tomatoes, eggplant, potatoes, peppers, bumblebees are the main pollinators. No bumblebees, no potatoes. No bumblebees, no tomatoes. We also have a group of bees that are lined up this way. So social bees, things like the non-native honeybee. We also have some bumblebees that live in kind of a social group, more like a condo association rather than the hive structure that a honeybee has. You have solitary bees with ground nests. Now that's a bee, not a wasp or what you might call a hornet. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then cavity nesting bees like this really cute leaf cutting bee. If you have holes like this, if you have a redbud or other leaves and you're seeing that round hole, that means your yard is really good for wildlife. And if you were to call me up and say, oh my gosh, my leaves are being chewed to bits, and I saw that, I'd say, you are so lucky. You've got leaf cutter bees. They're very mild-mannered, and what they're doing, it's the female, so she cuts that little circle. That's basically the diameter of her mouth. She cuts that little circle. She flies back to an open tube. It might be a piece of bamboo or a hollowed out plant stem. She rolls it up like a little cigar and she puts one egg and a little bit of pollen in there, tucks them in and does it again until that whole piece of stem is completely full. Then she seals it off and waits for the season before the next guys hatch out. So she's really doing a great job. She's pollinating your plants and she's protecting her babies. And even though she may take a few little holes, she's doing a good job for your yard. On this picture, you've got two things that look like bees, which are not. Kind of that whole, if I dress like a monarch, but I don't taste bad, then I won't get eaten. So that's what's going on here. You've got the hoverfly, and I'm sure you've encountered those. At first glance, they move like they're a bee. But when you look at them more closely, you see these gigantic fly eyeballs, and the shape of their wings is more of that triangular shape than our honeybees or other native bees have. This other one, called the robber fly, oh, there he is. He's kind of dressed up to look like a bumblebee. The birds are less likely to eat a bumblebee. Flies, they're going to eat that. But a bumblebee, they're not going to do it. There is a robber fly that actually preys on bees. So it looks a little bit like a bee from a distance, and it waits for them to get close, and then they eat him. A lot of that going on in nature. Wasps and hornets. And I know this can be a tricky situation for people. And we all know how this goes as the season moves on. A paper wasp is the small nest that might be up underneath the windowsill outside, in the corner of the door jamb, in the corner of your garage, but it's only about 1 layer thick. Now it might contain 6, 8, 10, maybe even 2 dozen wasps within that small bit. It doesn't get any bigger than that. It's not like a bald-faced hornet that can make a nest in a few months that's as big as a basketball. A lot of times people won't notice them until October when the leaves have fallen. And I'll get a call going, what am I supposed to do about it? Well, nothing, it's done. That's from basically March to July or August that colony has been in effect. All of those other insects have left. The female might make it through the winter. There could be a few egg or larvae. So if you think that's a beautiful paper art piece, I would say leave it outside and let it freeze, because if you bring it in, there might be a few stragglers. But it is quite beautiful. So they chew wood. That could be the wood on your house, the wood on a fence, leftover lumber, firewood. They chew it up with their saliva and they make paper, which we'll talk about at another program. So they're probably the first paper makers instead of people. These guys, they do have kind of a bad attitude. You call them yellow jacket or ground hornet. They are a tiny wasp with a big attitude. You know, they're not much bigger than the tip of my baby finger. They will go into a hole. They can't make that hole. They go into a hole that's been a chipmunk or a mole hole, and they put a paper nest up inside the chamber that was the house for the mole or the chipmunk. So it flies in, the queen flies in, she starts to make one little bit, and it gets bigger and bigger, and she just keeps provisioning these. The workers fly out and get nectar and put those in, and she lays more eggs, kind of like a honeybee. These guys have a lot of attitude. They sting first and ask questions later. And I'm sure you've heard tales, or maybe you experienced where you were going over the hole, didn't know it was there with a lawnmower. That vibration really gets them mad, and they come out flying out after you. One of the things that you can do, people always want to try and go out after dark to try and deal with a hornet's nest or a wasp nest. They've had the whole day to warm up. They're still ready to do battle. If you want to check that nest, go out in the early morning hours when it's still dewy and a tiny bit cooler. That's the time where, in a case like that, you could drop a big glass jar or a big glass bowl over the top of it, and they don't have the sense to fly to another. That hole that they're in has another opening, but they can't follow that. They only know that one way in or out. And it will take a while, and they will end up dying off. You can also use, they call it a sure shot or foam. If you want to go that far, you feel like you have to destroy that nest. Same thing. You do it only in the cool, damp hours. If you have any hesitation, call a person whose specialty is nuisance wildlife removal, because nobody wants you to get stung. That's not the plan. There's the chunk of ground hornet or ground bee or yellow jacket, whatever you want to call them. They're the ones that come in August, September, even October. They're very interested in your soda pop, or if you dropped your ice cream cone or that kind of thing. Or if you're having a cookout, they're going after your burger. The reason is they will go for that protein. They're drawn to that protein, not for themselves, but they're chewing up that burger meat and they're taking it back to feed the larvae in the nest. The adults only eat nectar and have some pollen. Here's the big cicada killer, and I do have an example in one of the jars up here. So this cicada killer wasp is almost as long as my finger. I mean, chances are you're not going to argue with her. She doesn't want to sting you. In fact, they're really hard to provoke. But when you have something that huge, are you going to question it? No, you're going to back away. That's a good idea. They actually will go and find a cicada. They sting it and paralyze it. Then they take it back to a hole that they made in sandy soil, which is, it's easy to see why they would do that. It's easy digging. But if that's your horseshoe court or your sand volleyball court or a playground, that can be a problem. So they make a hole down in there. They get that big cicada that is now paralyzed. They lay one egg on that cicada. They close off that little chamber, and they go for another one. And so that egg hatches in a couple days, and the larva eats the cicada while it's alive. That provisions the young. Now that happens in a lot of these. If you look at things like mud daubers, do I have a couple of that? Yeah. Mud daubers or pipe organs, you might have those on the side of your house, or this really cute little potter's wasp. They will go and find spiders. It's kind of interesting because spiders eat insects, and then insects are eating spiders. So the wasp will go and hunt out a spider, sting it, paralyze it, put it in that. Each of these chambers has about 6 or 8 separate rooms. Each one has one little immobilized spider and one wasp egg. And they just keep going that until she's out of eggs, I guess. They seal it up and they move on. She's not going to live the rest of the season after that. then as those babies hatch out, they find their way out. Or if you have a downy woodpecker, he hit the jackpot because that becomes a buffet. Not only does he eat the young wasp, he gets to eat the spider too. But look at how perfect that wasp, that potter's wasp, it looks like somebody had that on a potter's wheel with that very small neck on there. All right. Fleas are an insect. Nobody likes to talk about fleas. Nobody wants to have fleas. And what's really interesting to me is that when your dog is infested with fleas, it's more than likely cat fleas. Why cat fleas are, I don't know, they like more different kinds of animals, I suppose. And that becomes a real issue when you're trying to beat that cycle, because their little tiny eggs can rest, they can be laid in a carpet, they can be on clothing in a corner, they can be on soft upholstery, and then they hatch out and it starts all over again. And that can be a real problem both for animals and humans, because if you get bit, that's not uncomfortable, and all of that scratching with phyto can cause a secondary infection because that skin is broken open. So that's a case where if you have a creature in your house that has fleas, to seek proper treatment and then talk with a professional about how to rid your house. It's not going to happen in one treatment. It's going to take a while. Ants. The number of ants that we have is pretty amazing, and that's, again, kind of a tricky subject where people have maybe that love-hate relationship. When I see an ant out in the driveway, I'm really, oh, that's so cool, look what he's moving. If I see him in my kitchen, I have a completely different attitude. You've got the whole outside, what are you doing in here? We've got, of course, carpenter ants that can chew through wood. That becomes a real issue for us. But we also have things which we call pavement ants. Those are the ones you might see swarming in the pavement, but they will also come into your house and they are seeking sweet things, especially if it's very dry. We're heading into a very dry period. So we might have more of these types of creatures coming in looking for sweet nourishment. They would be looking for nectar and plant juices out in the wild. If they can't get it because it's too dry, they will seek it elsewhere. The difference between ants and termites, I want you to look at the face of this guy. So this is one of the guards. He has those big pinchers, a very elongated head, and rather a skinny body compared to an ant that has very distinct 3 segments. So here's what they look like when they're flying. And it does take a little bit of work, because when you see them flying, that's their mating swarm. Whether it's ants or termites, it might be a little upsetting. And you have to make your brain be quiet for a minute and catch one and look at it and go, okay, this is an ant or a termite. Because the action that you take beyond that might be different. Different insects require different defense. I want to talk a little bit about us protecting ourselves from insect and tick bites, that kind of thing, mosquitoes. So there's a whole campaign that's called Fight the Bite, and boy, are we in the thick of it now this season with it being warm. Ohio has about 50 species of mosquito, not all of them native. At a certain point when you're getting bit, you might think, I don't care where you came from, I don't want to get bit. This tree-hole mosquito is really, really common. And especially, I think, around Forest Park, we have a lot of moist woods and so on. I know where I am, I can have mosquitoes at any time of the day when I'm working out there. Only the females bite. So while you're scrolling the internet and they're telling you how to put out some lemon-flavored dish soap and something else to keep mosquitoes from biting you, the males may be drawn into that because they seek nectar, but they don't bite. They're not the problem. As far as protecting yourselves, and we'll talk about some of the products here in just a minute, but I really want you to avoid going whole hog and thinking about calling in an agency that wants to fumigate your whole yard. Mosquitoes are a flying insect. If you fumigate, you only get what's out there. It's not residual, and it does not delineate. So not only are you killing mosquitoes, you're killing what I would say are the good bugs as well. This guy often gets smacked around because people think it's a giant mosquito. You've got these crane flies that bump around. They're not very good flyers. You'll find them in the spider web right outside the front door in the morning. They're there by the porch light. They don't bite. They're just nectar eaters. But because of that shape and size, people assume that this is a giant mosquito and run for cover. The idea of making sure you're protected is drain and dress correctly and defend. So look at around your yard at what you might have that's holding water, whether it's toys, a tire, a bucket that's left upright. Turn that, if you want to keep the bucket outside, great. Turn it upside down so you don't have rainwater. Mosquito only needs about 1/2 inch and 2 days at 70 degrees. Well, I don't think it even went to 70 degrees last night. So we're in a very hot period before they will find that. All of your plants that have those trays underneath them, those saucers, you need to make sure those are emptied out because those can easily become breeding areas as well. Clean your bird bath. The way to clean your bird bath to make sure there's not standing water is good old elbow grease. Get a brush that you're not going to use for anything else. Give it a good scrub. You probably don't need any kind of soap or chemical, nothing. Just scrub it out. Flush it a few times with fresh water, and then refill it. The other thing is, as much as you might hate to hear this in 90 degrees, if you're going to be spending a lot of time out where it could be insect or ticks, they tell you to wear light-colored clothing, long sleeves, and long pants. I know that sounds awful, but it will help protect you. And if it's light-colored, they're less likely to come to you, and you can see them. If I go out wearing my blue corduroy, well, I can't see them crawling on me, and I'm also putting out more heat with that dark color, which means that's more carbon dioxide, which will draw these biting things. So wear long clothing, use registered repellents, the types that might have DEET, or if you want to go with something that doesn't have that strong chemical, you can use something like, believe it or not, Skin So Soft has been tested by the Air Force, and it does have a pretty good response. There's also one called Bug Soother that has vanillin and lemongrass. And it does okay, but it doesn't have any harsh chemicals in it. If you're going into an area, if you're working on a field project, you're going to be out, you might have to look at using a DEET product or clothes that are treated with permethrin. When you get home, you're checking yourself or you're checking your partner for ticks, and all of those clothes should go immediately into the wash and then a hot dryer to make sure that you've killed any ticks that you've happened to come home. Here's a few examples of some of those DEET products. Some parks and national parks and natural areas have now gone to reminding you when you park your car, this could be a tick-infested area. We're seeing that more and more with these super hot temperatures especially. And then this is a product that you squirt only on your clothes. This is another one that the Air Force, I had a chance to attend a lecture with an entomologist from the Air Force talking about what the military uses to protect their people when they're out in the field in different places. And so a product like this one, permethrin, you spray your clothes, you allow it to completely dry, and then you have 6 weeks or 6 washings by using the clothes that's been treated. I will tell you that that particular one, you don't spray it on your skin. So you're going to hang your clothes up on the line or out on a chair, spray them, let them dry completely. It has to be dry completely. If you have a household that has cats, if this is wet, it can cause a toxic reaction. So they can get sick if they happen to ingest it. But it works really well. My husband is out in the field a lot, and we use this on his shirts, his pants, his socks, a kerchief, a hat. It makes a big difference. You can now buy that at pretty much any hardware store. So be tick smart, and remember this, ticks are not insects. Even though we throw them into that category with bugs, ticks are not insects. They're in the same family as spiders and mites. There are some tick ID cards. I think that's on the table, right? You got the little tick ID cards? Yep. So hopefully everybody got that to help you understand the different types of ticks and also how to remove them. Real quick, spiders are not insects. That's the other one that gets lumped in there. Spiders have an important job to do, and so we have to let them do what they need to do. That's the fishing spider from a few weeks ago on my barn, and with her legs, I would say she was probably about 4 inches across. Now that's from the tip of this leg to the tip of the next leg. Her body was maybe the size of my thumb, but pretty impressive nonetheless. And that's what I have in the container here, a smaller version. You might also encounter this great garden spider, the Argiope, that makes that crazy looking zigzag in that. Those webs can be as much as 30 inches across. So they can take anything from a little fly to a beetle to a pretty good sized moth. Even a praying mantis has been caught in there. This one, the trash line spider, you may have seen these where it looks like a bunch of junk in the middle of that web, and there's the spider hiding in the middle. If it looks like garbage, you're not going to bother me, right? Yeah. So we have all these other spiders, and I just joined a group called Spiders Ohio. They have a wonderful Facebook page that is managed by arachnologists. So if you have a spider and you take a picture, you can post it there, and sometimes within seconds, you will have an answer back. And they will tell you if there's any like medical significance, if you really need to be concerned about it. Daddy longlegs are not spiders. They happen to be in a similar family. They're arachnids, but they are not spiders. They're not venomous, and they do not bite. So I know we've all heard those stories growing up. They don't have fangs, all of that kind of thing. This is a velvet mite that doesn't bother people. They find them crawling around once in a while. In fact, the daddy longleg that's in here has some little red mites, not the velvet mite, on his legs. So here we have an arachnid being feasted upon by another arachnid. And then, of course, there's chiggers. Have you ever traveled to a different part of the country where they don't have chiggers and you're trying to explain what that's like when you get a case of the chiggers? It's not nice. So what's so good about bugs, you ask? Well, insects play this vital role in the health of our planet. No bugs, no plants. No fruit, no vegetables. No bugs, no songbirds. If you like hummingbirds, you need bugs. Did you know that? Hummingbirds eat 70 to 80% of their diet is insect. So if you are spraying for insects, using other pesticide or herbicide, because think about that, if you use herbicide, then the bugs can't eat the flower, and the bugs can't be there for the hummingbird as well. No songbirds, no wading birds or swimming birds, no game birds. You like turkeys? We need bugs for turkeys. No amphibians, and some lizards. I did put that on there. No bugs, well then no small mammals. And you may say, well, I don't need rats and mice. You may not think you need mice and rats or shrews and voles, but the fox does, the raccoon does, the coyote does, the birds of prey, all need those small creatures. If those go away, badgers, fox, bobcat, they all need those small mammals to survive. That's one of the most important things that you can do is take on the idea of learning more about insects. Now, yes, you're still going to categorize them as what's a good bug and what's a bad bug. But I'm hoping that this kind of a talk will make you stop first before you go and get that spray and think you're going to annihilate it. There is a printout of these particular resources so that you can go and look at that. Heather Holm is excellent in terms of pollinators, really wonderful. She's written a few books. You can go and look that up. There's the Facebook page, that's Spiders of Ohio. This one, all bugs to go to Kevin. Yes, that's what it says. That's his name, Kevin. Again, excellent resource. You can post a picture and get an almost instantaneous response that is a reliable entomologist, not somebody looking it up on the internet. And again, as I said before, if you keep calm and carry on, it'll be okay. All right. What kind of questions has it stirred up? Your head is swimming. Nothing? It hurts too much, yeah.
It's not really a question, but since this group is interested, we just got back from the Little Smokies Fireflies Weekend in Shawnee State Park, and they'll be planning to do it next year.
Matthew Spites was there, yeah.
They tried to time it for the synchronous fireflies, because there's a synchronous fireflies population in Ohio that's like the one in the Smoky Mountains that you have to get in a lottery for. So they tried to time it, but
I think you're a little early.
it was
Yeah.
they were early.
Oh.
The fireflies came on early. So we didn't really see the synchronous, but there's a lot of other species that have different flash patterns. So it was really interesting, and especially, so we got to see the one they called the Chinese lantern, which like rises up and then
Kind of floats,
pops like
yeah.
a flash bulb, and then sinks back down. And then, you know, they were in the trees. It's just beautiful, because they took us out late at night, and they took us on hikes. So it was the Arc of Appalachia.
Yeah, that hosted that. And when you get out to those areas away from light pollution, you get to see so much more in terms of fireflies.
Very dark forest. And then the same group, the Arc of Appalachia, is running an event called Mothapalooza
Right,
next month, which they may still have openings for. And they're going to plan on having the excursions at night and hang the sheets so
Right.
the moths are attracted, so you get to see the actual critters.
Right. The idea that she's talking about, you can do in your own backyard. I mean, I happen to be lucky enough to have, Army Corps property behind me, so it's really dark and more forested. But the idea is that you hang a white sheet, either on a clothesline, or it could be between a couple of chairs. You illuminate it from the bottom, and then the insects come in. And if you're willing to stay up late, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, that's when some of the big moths like that, the Polyphemus, the Cecropia, the Luna, may come out. So we do have them here. You just have to make a little more effort to go and see them. That's a good tip.
Yeah.
That's great. Fantastic. No other questions? All right, sir. I guess you're up. We got all kinds of good things.
I would like to thank Carol Mundy. I mean, every time she gives a presentation, I learn something. So hopefully you learn something, and if you have an opportunity and you talk with some friends or family members and they might want to know a little bit more, just tell them to go to our website and they'll be able to see it in about a week or so. Now we're going to do the raffle. Now I guarantee you, you will win something tonight. That's it for this evening. If y'all haven't had a chance to look at the tables up here, please do. And again, we're going to have another one in August. And you're all on my email list, so keep an eye out. Thank you for coming.